And what this is an AI readiness enablement, an example of an AI readiness or enablement engagement that we've done with a real client. What I'm going to show you here, it's real data. It's about 100-person firm. Uh, Everything's obviously redacted, but I want to walk you through what it looks like. What does the process look like? We talked a little bit about shadow AI and how to even understand, are your people using AI or not? Yes, the answer is almost certainly that all of you have people using it, even if you're not sure that they are. Um, and so, you know, blocking it wholesale is one approach, but really doesn't work from what we've seen. People are going to get on their cell phones and they're going to set up a personal ChatGPT account, and they're going to figure out ways to start using these tools. Um, and allowing it all without any kind of oversight is also not a great strategy either, right? Because that's how you see data leakage happen and all sorts of other things. And so we don't see shadow AI as like this is the term used for it now, but we don't really see it as necessarily a problem. It's a sign that your employees are trying to do their jobs better, and you just haven't really given them, a clear path on what are we using. Shadow IT is a term maybe many of you are already familiar with. It's been used for a long time. Is just the idea of your users going and installing apps and using things and services, right, that you're not aware of. And so, as Trey kind of the example he pointed out earlier, new payroll system was brought online. Nobody knew about it, right? Um, if we're using SharePoint or OneDrive, in our company, should people just be allowed to go create a Dropbox account and upload corporate data so they can easily share that with some customer that's also using Dropbox, and it's just the easy way to do it? Same thing with AI, right? And so this AI readiness enablement process, really starts with um, understanding, yeah, what's the lay of the land look like currently. And so there's a full report, that sample report we can share with anybody who's interested. We'll have a QR code at the end here that you guys can scan if you want to connect with us. And we're happy to share like the actual, it's about 30 pages, these reports. So I didn't want to go over all of it in gory detail, but this is real data from a real customer. And you can see right here, 54% of their approximately 100 users or so detected using AI tools. Out of those, 17 specific apps detected, and over 4,000 sessions, which is, a user interacting with ChatGPT or whatever it might be. And then you can see down here a breakdown. We can get visibility all the way down to, there were 36 people specifically on ChatGPT. So you can see in this particular organization, obviously that's the platform of choice, whether it was by design or not. That's what's getting used. But you can also see there's Google Gemini, there's Claude, there's Perplexity, there's all these different flavors of AI going on there. So we see this almost 100% of the time. We've talked to a lot of customers that said, nope, we're not using it. Or I know Jimmy and Bob are using it. Well, we do the scan and, well, it turns out they're not using what you thought. And there's actually 6 other people using something you weren't even aware of. So I think knowledge, knowing is half the battle. I think that's true here. So this is where we start, and it's a pretty easy scan to run. And we can pull out at least this at a high level. And then I think this is interesting too, because it will also break it down by department. And so if you're also wondering where are the risks, or where's the innovation maybe happening, you can see in this particular example, it's finance, which, would be finance and legal, probably the 2 highest risk, departments in a business. And you can see that's where AI has been adopted the most. So we start with a scan to get an idea. And then from there, we start talking about what problems are we trying to solve? What business processes are we looking to automate, if that is, part of what we're trying to do here? And so we touched on it in the panel a little bit, but having an acceptable use, an AI policy, is a good place to start. And don't think of it as just some 5-page, verbose document that we're going to file away and nobody's going to read. I mean, that could be the case, but this is more so you as an organization or leadership team sitting down and discussing and deciding what it is you are going to use. And it doesn't have to be one. It's not, just pick this one and nothing else, but have a purpose, right? Have a purpose and a plan on what you're trying to do, what you're going to be using. And then, it was brought up your question about the center of excellence, that same type of approach, start building that within your company. And that starts with, the one or two or however many you have champions, the people that are curious that maybe are already using it. And again, we'll be able to see more detail on like who those people are and get some ideas on uh, who might be like good early adopters. And so this scan will also go through and look at out of everybody that's using, tools within the environment, which ones are considered high readiness candidates. How many hours approximately per user? And this is kind of a fluffy number, but and in fact, I think in real world cases, we've seen this number be even higher. Mapping it to some specific, in this case, Copilot use cases. Microsoft Copilot, that's their AI product, but this isn't specific to Copilot. You could be using Claude. You don't, this really applies to just about any of these models out there. And then some specific recommended actions too around the data governance, the guardrails, because that's a really important part. And it doesn't get talked about too often. I think the analogy of running with scissors is pretty good because a lot of people are jumping headfirst into these tools and have no idea uh, and aren't even making any kind of inroads to try to secure them. Um, so ranking again departments by opportunity and helping within your business, if you have multiple departments, where you might get the most traction, right? And again, this is all sussed out of, user activity and how much data people are touching, not just like what license they have. And so again, getting a breakdown here by user and by title, by department, and a scoring system that kind of shows like who, if we're going to look to build a center of excellence or a innovation team, who are the people that we should start having conversations with inside. And then we look at the security pieces, right? So there's about 5 main domains that we look at, starting with identity and access. So if you don't have clean accounts, multi-factor. If that doesn't look good, if you got too many people with admin rights, or you're not even sure where you stand on that, then you could get yourself into some trouble, right? And so these are just foundational things that many of you I know firsthand have in place, but many people don't, and a lot of folks struggle with how to get there. So looking at specific things just before we get into data and devices and all that fun stuff is how well are we set up on that perimeter layer. Email communication, there's a lot of oversharing. There's a lot of settings within email that are not necessarily quite ready for full rollouts of AI. Data governance, files and collaboration, all these things, right? There's oversharing, there's permission problems. A lot of us have 10, 20 years of data that's just been building up and building up in our environments and is now in a lot of different silos. And the neat thing about AI is it will go and find anything that you ask it to find. And that's not a shortcoming of the technology. It's working as it's designed, right? But it's going to turn up the volume essentially on any data governance, any data permissions problems that you might have already had that are just sitting there, right? That those things get amplified. So we look at all of these, and again on the actual report, there's a very detailed analysis of all these things you're seeing here. I'm just kind of showing you some red, yellow, green lights for purposes of the slide presentation. But yeah, we can get real specific into your actual environment and how you're configured and how you line up in comparison to some of these best practices that are here. And these are examples of things, right? DLP is data loss prevention. Mike touched on it earlier. They're doing some of this, and DLP basically is the idea of data loss prevention, right? Being able to monitor the flow of data, where it's going, who has permissions to it in real time, and prevent those things from either being sent in an email or downloaded to a computer that isn't managed by the organization or uploaded into something like ChatGPT. As we get into things like sensitivity labels, these are things that we can do in the Microsoft ecosystem around, classifying data, because that's really how a lot of the DLP stuff works, is you got to tell it. If it's just one big blob of data, it's not really going to know other than scanning for certain types of patterns or numbers, right? We can start going and classifying data. So oversharing of permissions, conditional access gaps are just things that are their policies and things like that in place that help enforce various security policies. And so there's just a lot of these things that are not enabled in most customer environments, and even ourselves, right? We had to go through and enable and turn on a lot of these things before we were really ready to roll out some of these AI tools to ourselves. And so this is kind of what it looks like in that first phase, is really going through and establishing a baseline. And a baseline is essentially putting some of these in policies in place in the most frictionless way possible. So we're not going to start blocking things. We're not going to get in people's ways. It's just putting in some of these monitoring guardrails to see what's actually happening from a data movement perspective. And then from there, start deploying, policies to help improve the security around that data. And so, the phase two piece of it then comes into starting to pilot with people. And so once we've got this baseline established, we start really turning on, more specific DLP type policies. And then, finally doing a more of a license or a more of an org wide rollout, once we think we have things dialed in. But I think the takeaway is you got to understand who's using what first. And that's the first order of business. And then the second is, deciding what tools you're going to use, and then building that policy, like I mentioned, that plan for the organization on where you're going with this stuff. So this is just a high level overview of how we approach this, how we've seen some of our clients approach this. And if you guys have any questions or want to learn more about it, definitely connect with us either here or after the event, and we'd be happy to share some of the, actual reports and kind of walk you through like what it might look like in your particular environment. Hey, I'm not running all the Microsoft tools, or I'm using Google, or whatever your case may be. If you've still got some hybrid or on-prem infrastructure, like this is all still extremely relevant.